Southwest Regional Development Commission. We cover the 9 counties in the far southwest corner of Minnesota. We border both Iowa and South Dakota.
And good morning, I'm Dawn Hidlin. I'm Executive Director of the Upper Minnesota Valley Regional Development Commission. We serve a 5-county area, including the county that you're in right now. So welcome to the Upper Minnesota Valley and welcome to the region that I work on.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about DevelopMN, or DevelopMN as we call it, which was a plan that we put together as our statewide organization.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back.
Technology. Well, how did you enjoy Granite Falls so far? Yay! Right? Great hospitality here in western Minnesota. If you haven't been to the region before, we're thrilled to have you, and we encourage you to come back. We heard the mayor talk about yesterday, there are lots of opportunities that exist here, so I've heard several people talk about the traffic that they had to sit in Minneapolis on their way here, and having noticed we don't have that same issue. There are lots of opportunities here. We'd be glad to have you. We can eliminate that stress and give you back some time in your day by not having to deal with traffic. Now, I will say that there are certain times of year where in sugar beet country you might get behind large implements during the fall season, the harvest season, or during the winter when they're hauling sugar beets. But that's a small price to pay for having no delays in traffic. I drove 45 miles to get here. It took me 45 minutes to get here. So very predictable day in and day out, as well as all the other wonderful things that are going on in the region. We're going to share some of the examples of work that's going on throughout Greater Minnesota today in this DevelopMN plan. And you've had a chance to sample some of the things downtown and in the park last night that are going on in small communities and large communities all across Greater Minnesota. Much of that is based on great work that's being done at the local level, and partnerships have been forged between communities and counties and local organizations like yours.
Yeah. We'll just keep going here because it's kind of stuck. So
we'll get it fixed. We're just calling the IT person.
So one of the things always when I address a room full of Metro people, really we need to focus on, if you're not familiar with who we are as an organization, our state association is the Minnesota Association of Development Organizations. We're made up of the regional development commissions, which are statutory commissions that were created in the early 70s and are governed by our local elected officials. So we have county board members, we have city council members, we have township officials and school board members on our governing board, and then each of us has regionally specific public interest groups. So we have higher education in my region, we have health and human services, and Ann from our commission is sitting out in the audience today.
Our workforce boards, or workforce boards are in this area, the private industry council, higher ed often.
And so when I speak to people from the Metro, they say, oh, you're like the Met Council. Well, we're not like the Met Council because we don't have any regional authority to do anything. We don't have any of our own money, and our boards are made up of local elected officials. And when I address people at the Association of Minnesota Counties, that's the key thing that they like, is the fact that everybody on my board, except for those small percentage that we have of public interest group, are local elected officials. And those are the people that make our decisions.
And that's who we work for and report to every day.
So we got together as an organization and decided, we've been working together. Maybe we should do this in a little more purposeful method. And so we decided we needed some kind of plan to look at all of rural Minnesota and see what we had in common, what it is that we could all work on together.
And agree upon, because regions across the state are different, and we have different issues, different things going on, but we all have some similarities. And so this was really an intent to come together and to come upon an agreed set of things that we would all do some work on together, but maybe that work is different from region to region.
And so, of course, you can't do anything without money. So a shout out to our funders, the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, the Bush Foundation, and the Blandon Foundation. We're most appreciative for the funding to help us do this. So a little overview. We're going to just kind of walk through the plan a little bit. In the back of your booklet, you'll see all of our strategies and goals. So it's a statewide community development initiative and a rural economic development collaborative. We don't do anything in rural Minnesota without working with somebody. When we talk a little bit about how our economic development programs, we partner oftentimes with the Southwest Initiative Foundation in our loan programs, and we're partnering with local counties and cities and economic development folks to get these projects done, because none of us have the resources to do it by ourselves. The process, first we looked at best practices. We had our National Association come in and show us what some other states were doing. So we stole what we could from them. Florida model we particularly liked. They called their process pillars.
The four pillars.
The four
yes.
pillars, but we thought that was a little too antediluvian for Minnesota, so no pillars here. And then we did a SEDS review. For those of you who don't know, we are, as the regional development organizations in Minnesota, economic development districts as designated by the Federal Economic Development Administration, which is a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is a big mouthful to say. But what that means is we do a comprehensive economic development strategy every 5 years as required by our federal partners. And so we look through everybody's current sets.
And these documents cover much of greater Minnesota, and they really lay out local opportunities and issues in all sorts of arenas as defined by our federal partners.
And one of the things that I did not mention was we talked about the regional development commissions a little bit, but also in Mado, which we put in the map, the West Central Initiative Foundation is also one of our partners, as they do a lot of the planning similar to what we do in there. So the SWOT analysis, if you're familiar with the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
And we realize there's no possible way that you can read that.
Read it, right. It's just a graph.
Everybody's done these, so it's just a lesson.
So our economic development staff put all this work into this, draw this together. Ryan from Headwaters is here. If you want detailed questions, you can ask him, because he was in the room when this got done. They basically locked themselves in a room for 2 days in St. Cloud and said, well, what do we have in common? What rises to the level of a priority statewide?
And so Jay talked about, we looked at models across the state, across the nation, that were looking at issues in some sort of plan at a statewide level. And Florida calls their main buckets pillars, and we decided not to call ours pillars, we call them cornerstones. So foundational pieces, and we really picked four. We heard yesterday about kind of the capital models, right? And there's lots of ways to slice and dice and aggregate common themes. And these are the four common themes that we came up with, and we called them cornerstones. So human capital, here a theme there, right? Economic competitiveness, community resources, and foundational assets.
Under human capital, the two main subheadings are labor force and educational attainment, and I know we talked a lot about that yesterday. So you're going to see our plan is kind of dovetailing with a lot of the things that we talked about yesterday. And you can't read these either probably, but these are the labor force goals. These are in your packet.
In that little blue program.
Yep. So we'll go through that quick. Educational attainment. Now, one of the things that I wanted to stress is is I didn't go to some website and pay for pictures. I asked people for pictures because we do this a lot. And these are all photos of things we're actually doing. So one of the key things, the key takeaways out of this is we put the plan together over a couple of years. We spun our wheels a little bit a couple of times because nobody had ever done this
Lots of
before.
deliberation and agreeing, trying to, compromise here to come up with things that we all can agree on.
And at this point, we're implementing it. We're saying these were our priorities, these are the things we need to work on, and now we're working on them.
And again, this plan was done to drive the kind of work that we do across greater Minnesota. There are 10 regional development organizations that are part of this plan, and we all work in these spaces. And so the reason, we talked a little bit about the reason for doing the blueprint that we're going to get to today. And the reason that we decided to do this was because we're all doing some things that we found that if we can create some alignment in the topics that we're doing and then all work together, but maybe differently on how we get there, we're going to be able to aggregate the work we're going to do individually together and be able to show some difference across the state based on these common principles or cornerstones.
So our next cornerstone then is economic competitiveness, entrepreneurship and innovation, small business growth. This is a picture of a Mexican bakery in Worthington, which was our first Latina loan in our revolving loan fund. We have done a number of loans since then in the community of Worthington, many of which in partnership with the Southwest Initiative Foundation. I would like to say that we were targeting the new population purposefully, but we kind of stumbled into it. But you don't have to beat me over the head too many times before you say there's an untapped market here.
There's a need.
There's a need. And Worthington's an interesting situation because if you're a small town and you don't have a bakery, and somebody comes in and says, we're going to open a bakery, it doesn't really matter who they are. And so in the smaller communities, we've seen that, especially in Worthington. We went from the downtown area having a lot of empty storefronts to full. And that's because of the new immigrant populations coming in and starting businesses. And so they need access to capital, and that's one of the things we do. And so we've been purposeful since then in reaching out to that market. But really it was the bankers in Worthington who recognized the opportunity and said, we need to be investing in this community, and this is how we need to be doing it.
So community resources, all of our communities have assets, and there are so many possibilities if you really focus on asset-based development. One of the things, maybe go to the next one. Maybe there are so many. One more. There we go. So some of what you saw last night when you're here in Granite Falls was some of the local asset-based development that has happened around arts and culture. You perhaps at the chamber office, the KK building, you maybe saw some of the murals, mosaic murals on the outside of the building. You certainly heard from local musicians last night. You saw a performance, not by a local group, but you maybe talked to Ashley Hansen, who's talking about, was donated a building on Main Street in Granite Falls to start an artist in residency program, and she has done some amazing arts work in this community. You maybe saw a mural on the backside of the flood wall. All of these things are working with local artists that are here, and because some of that started, the wheel gets going, right? And the first thing led to the next thing, the next thing. All of a sudden, they have a lot of people excited and feeling good about their community. It's not only made an aesthetic improvement in their Main Street and in their community, but it's drawn people together in this community to say, hey, what can we do together? And it has led to a myriad of things. Now, this happens not only in Granite Falls, but across the state. And so there are opportunities for all of our communities to build on things and people and assets that happen in their local community. And I don't remember who mentioned, and thanks for the shout out yesterday about the Meander Art Crawl. So that's something that's happened in our 5-county region as a regional art crawl. We're in our 15th year. And actually, I brought some brochures this morning because I assumed the chamber office would have had them last night, but they were delivered to one of the artists in town and they hadn't made their way to the chamber office yet. So I did bring some, and they're on the table out in the hallway. But again, this happened, probably started in a conversation probably 20 years ago. And our office served as kind of the pot stirrer for this project by bringing people together. And what has happened over a 5-county area, we've brought artists together who had no reason previously to talk to one another. Now they're collaborating on projects, and there's little nuggets of things going on, like what you saw in Granite Falls. They're happening in communities across the region and across the state. And so looking at cultural and arts-related activities as placemaking and ways for communities to build on their assets, and it makes people feel good. And it makes a difference in their community. And it makes people recognize that that community is doing something, and they're excited about what they're doing. So it has all of these indirect benefits. And again, arts and culture might be a focus on natural resources. One of the things, I don't think anybody talked about it last night, but one of the things, again, that's happening in Granite Falls, they're talking about a whitewater park here in Granite Falls on the lower side of the dam on the Minnesota River that they're working with DNR to get organized, because we have this asset of the Minnesota River here. It's great for canoeing, it's great for kayaking, it's got some rapids in there, and it would be a very attractive asset, again, for this community. So there's all sorts of things in the community resources bucket, in the cornerstone, again, that we looked at across the state and could agree on, whether that's tourism, natural resources, water quality. We talk a lot about water quality, glass of water. It's something that we all can agree on that's critically important across our state.
The next cornerstone is foundational assets. You can see here broadband access, which is very important, transportation, active transportation, transit, water, wastewater infrastructure, housing availability,
Celebrate those sewers.
All things that we talked about yesterday. So these are the built environment around us.
And critically important, and terrifically not sexy to talk about, work on, but everybody turns the light or flushes the toilet and expects that to work. Everybody expects, we have good drinking water to drink.
The housing availability here, we used a picture from Headwaters that does a lot of work around housing. This is development up there in Bemidji that they've been putting together. We partner in Southwest with the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership. A couple people were here yesterday from that organization. Don sits on the board. I sat on the board for 14 years, and I sit on like 30 of the limited partnership boards. But Headwaters didn't have a partnership, and so they saw that need and they filled that niche. So you can see what has happened across the state is the regional development organizations see the need, fill the niche, and then when we get together, we steal each other's ideas.
Absolutely.
So implementation, you see partnerships, the local SEDS. One thing I talked about the SEDS, we were all on off years because we all started at different times and our plans were all due at different times. Our federal partners at the Chicago EDA office allowed us to do our SEDS at the same time, which had never happened before.
Across the country.
Across the country. Nobody'd ever been able to align all their SEDS, and they allowed us to do that. So now, every RDO in Minnesota that has a SEDS is due at the same time. So our new ones were due in December of 2016, and they all flow from this DevelopMN plan, and they all are tied together.
And they all really talk about, our local SEDS are kind of the local rendition of the DevelopMN framework that you just saw. And so it's the local things that we're doing that match up with those to kind of be able to report up on good work that's going on across greater Minnesota.
And during the development, both of the SEDS and of the DevelopMN plan, we reached out to our partners and our friends, and we brought our white papers and our information, and we said, this is what we're thinking about doing. Critique us, tell us what we're doing wrong, what are we missing? And then we put all of that information together in the bucket with the staff work, and then came up with all these cornerstones. And then we brought it back out to our partners again and said, all right, this is what you told us, this is what we heard, this is what we put together. I'm a minute late, Jane. So, questions, answers, observations? Yes, sir.
So I like everything on the list, but what I'm struck by, and given the data that we said yesterday about the need to attract and keep more people, and those people are likely to be immigrants, and the degree to which there's a fair amount of animus in Metro Greater Minnesota toward immigrants. I don't see anything explicitly here about intentional DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion work. I think there are places where it's maybe implied or where it could fit, but I'm concerned it's not specifically called out, given how critical it is that we get better across the state, particularly in Greater Minnesota, at welcoming other people. And even the reference to embracing emerging populations through targeted educational programs, which is key, doesn't speak to the fact that there's really a two-way education that has to go on in our state if this is going to work. Because if we don't change the soil, the people we're bringing in are not going to be able to grow, and they're not going to stay.
Absolutely, and I think I would, you hit on it when you said it's probably implied throughout, and we would agree with that. When we do our work, we're looking at everybody. Now, this was not built to this plan was not built to specifically address that issue, and so we really have felt that it is part of everything that we have done.
I just want to echo that it's critically important to actually call it out, because when you have a change in leadership, it will not be evident that you meant equity and that you were talking about diversity and inclusion and creating spaces that are equitable for everyone. It's not visible, and therefore many people won't read it if you don't say it deliberately.
And that's great commentary, and I think the one part of that is this plan was created for us, right? And so it's to guide the work that we do, and so we all hold each other accountable for that. And it isn't specifically to address that, but it is integrated into all the work we do.
So my question is, when you convene all of the regions, is there no participation and representation from the metropolitan version of the RDO? Because that would certainly flatten the divide, and I would hope help the state move together, especially addressing the issues of welcoming and retaining immigrant families and communities of color from the urban core to Greater Minnesota.
And our previous state association did include the Met Council. They opted to no longer participate.
So Burke, we're going to count on you to help us get them to the table, okay? Because it really wasn't an intended invitation to the Met Council to participate in the DevelopMN work. The one comment I did want to make, because it's valid about pointing out DEI work and how important it is to embrace emerging populations. It was called out in the very beginning, and it has been brought to our attention in the narrative when you look at the DevelopMN plan, that the way we think about building and doing the work is, of course, intentional about inclusion and diversity and equity. But it was a statement in the beginning, and maybe it wasn't as broad or as impactful as it could have been, but that's our lessons learned. If that's the lens you always think through and it's part of your DNA, that you are inclusive and that you do think about diverse populations, and that's how you do your work, we didn't call it out as broad and as loud as we maybe could have and should have, and that was our lesson learned as the first time that we did this. And it's been that lots of partners have mentioned that, but we do need to do a better job of that. But it was there and it is there again. And yes, we would love to have the Met Council participate.
We're going to take two more, and then we got to conclude from here.
Hi, thank you. My comment has to do with financing, and just a little bit of the story. The property that you're sitting in now is a new iteration of what was a little Quonset hut down by the river, that the Upper Sioux community went to the local banks. And of course, no one thought that Indians could handle money, so they denied a request, several requests for help. They went to Marshall, to the Wells Fargo, they went to Wilmer, they went to the big banks. Of course, no one thought Indians could handle money. This is a quote from my husband who's passed, who was on the board, who was part of this whole process. They found a little bank over in Bellevue, Minnesota. Little tiny sort of farmer cooperative bank who gave them $1 million on loan. And this is the result. So we're talking a couple of things. We have people who are not immigrants to this area who are disrespected for who they were and what they could do. And then we have who has access to capital. So I really commend the partnerships and the development corporations for opening those doors. Now, the tribe had to do it on their own, but I think we have a great opportunity to make sure that our immigrant communities that are coming in, we're creating bakeries, and we need a restaurant and a bar downtown, by the way. Just saying. And that's next. Thank you.
And just in response to that, when we do our gap financing and we put these financing packages together, we very rarely work with the big banks because they are not interested.
Oh, and I should have added the initiative fund, which I was
Last one over here.
It's okay. It's just a quick comment. Going back to, and I'm sorry if it feels like I'm beating a dead horse here, but the DEI question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If it's not consistently recentered and brought up again and again and again in the work, saying that we're doing this thing is not enough. It's absolutely not enough. Particularly as people of color in the area, as young people of color coming into this area. If there's not the upfront transparency that when we are doing this pillar, we're also remembering this. When we're doing this pillar, or this cornerstone, when we're doing this cornerstone, we're also remembering this. It's inadequate. It's gonna fall short. So to say it up front that yes, this is incorporated to it, that's great. That's awesome that you know that internally, but when there's not that consistent reminder, we all fall short.
That's concluding the statements. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.